It's a shocking statistic. A woman or girl is being killed somewhere in the world every 10 minutes. And that's by someone she knows, either an intimate partner or a family member. Now, this is not random. It's a pattern. It's a crisis. It's a global emergency. I'm Stefanie Dekker, and this is The Stream. Valeria Marquez was just 23, a beauty entrepreneur and influencer in Mexico. She was live streaming from her salon when she was shot dead. Her final moments played out in front of thousands. Aisha Tokyaz was 22, a nursing student in Istanbul with her whole future ahead of her. Her body was dismembered and found stuffed in a suitcase, an act of brutality that shook the nation. In Islamabad, 17-year-old Sana Yousaf, an aspiring influencer, she was shot dead in her own home. And 30-year-old Oloratu Mongali, a postgraduate student in Johannesburg, she went out on a date and never came home. Her body was later found abandoned in an open field. Well, these are just some of the murdered women that have recently made headlines, but there are countless others that go ignored and even unreported. Each of them had a story, a future, a life that mattered, a life cut short. Well, today we're asking, why is femicide still claiming so many lives? And what will it take to stop it? Well, we're joined by women on the front lines of this crisis, femicide researcher and journalist Sherele Moody. She joins us from Melbourne in Australia. Cameron Kasambala, Women for Change, South Africa's community manager. She's in Johannesburg. And freelance journalist Chantal Flores. She is based in Monterrey in Mexico. Ladies, thank you so very much for joining us today. Sherele, let me start with you. You're in Australia. You've been researching gender violence, femicide. How would you describe the state? I want to say the state of the world, but we do have a very international panel. But I suppose you are looking at Australians. How would you describe femicide? What have you documented, and how personal is this for you?
Mm-hmm. I would say that femicide in Australia is significantly on the increase. It's also significantly under-recognised by authorities, and also victims of femicide in Australia are often misidentified as misadventure deaths or suicide. So we have this kind of nexus which makes the figures look lower than they are. But I just want to come back and say one thing. With your introduction there, you said that, talking about the femicide taking these lives, I cannot stress this enough. Femicide is the term, but it's actually men taking their lives. And we really do need to name that, and we need to name the perpetrators, because we can't end this kind of violence if we don't talk about who's doing it.
And this is obviously factual and documented, and I think it's very interesting. We have Australia here, we have Mexico here, we have South Africa here, 3 continents, and a very similar story. Cameron, how endemic is it in South Africa, and where does it come from?
It's terrifying, honestly, to be a woman in South Africa. I think we are constantly afraid of leaving our home, and even if you don't leave your home, someone finding you in your home. It's a terrifying reality. I keep saying that, but living here, in the rape capital of the world, it is just horrific. And it's rooted in so many different elements. We can look at the history of violence in South Africa. We can look at patriarchy and how it views women as second-class citizens, the overlap of that into culture, the issue of substance abuse and poverty. Those different elements come into play, and they make this horrific brew of such a, horrific environment that we live in.
Chantal, you're in Mexico, crossing to the 3rd continent. You're a journalist. You have been also documenting the disappearance of women, the murder of women. Also, of course, journalists hugely under threat in Mexico. The cartels there also play a huge role. How would you describe the problem in Mexico and what you've documented over the years?
I think it's very similar to what my colleagues are mentioning. Femicides are underreported and often underinvestigated, right? We still need a lot of data to understand the mechanisms behind these killings. But obviously, the presence of organized crime in many parts of the Mexican territory has increased the vulnerability of women, and many feminist collectives, researchers, local journalists have documented that gender-based violence increases in areas where there is a strong presence of organized crime, right? So I think the violence is part of our everyday lives here in Mexico. The normalization of the violence is scary, but I think that we still need a lot of data and information to understand better femicides.
Sherele, you mentioned there, we talk about femicide, but you're saying it's actually men and how key men are also when it comes to tackling this huge problem. Well, some organizations like Mzansi Act Now in South Africa are hosting forums for men and boys to help tackle this issue.
In South Africa, we have a lot of sessions where we build up men forums, we build up men sectors, and we allow the men to talk because most men don't talk. You know, they keep or harbor most of their issues and challenges internally. So we are at a point where we want to stop them from internalizing challenges and get them to speak about their problems. So it's important to involve men because men can influence cultural and societal norms that perpetuate violence. It's also important to have men as allies because men are the same perpetrators that go out there and, you know, create all these forms of abuse. So to having men as allies or as our partners, we're dealing with the root cause where gender-based violence and femicide comes from. So men, play your role and play your part. Protect women, protect children, and protect yourselves. Let's end violence.
Cameron, how key are men when it comes to tackling this issue?
I think they're fundamental. I mean, the system was designed by men, and the only people who can really break that system down are men. And I think men respond more to other men calling them out. You know, as women, we speak up and we talk about, you know, don't disrespect us, don't hurt us, and they don't take it to heart. But when another man steps up and says, you know what, that is not okay, all of a sudden there's a switch in the brain that they're willing to receive this information and really take it in and acknowledge that, you know what, actually, if another man is telling me that, maybe it is a problem. And so I think without men, we're faced with a very, very long battle as women. And I think we might feel like view men as the enemy because we are constantly, you know, violated and killed by men. But without men in this conversation, I don't think we will see proper change. We need to have men hold each other accountable, especially in the spaces that we aren't always in.
You talked about the system there. Sherele, the system doesn't help, does it? I mean, there are so many cases that you hear after the fact when a woman or a girl has been murdered that she went to the police, she said, I was afraid of my boyfriend, my partner, my husband, and then it appears afterwards that she ended up being killed and not being taken seriously. You know, if we segue a little bit away from femicide, but it's within the same culture of rape, for example, you know, a woman accuses a man of rape and then the questions are, what were you wearing? Did you provoke him? Were you drunk? This is a reality that women face. Sherele, do authorities, do the police, do governments take this seriously?
I think that the police in particular have processes in place in Australia, specifically in the case of domestic and family violence. So there are processes in place and police are trained to do their job. The problem is that they don't always do their job. So a person could go into a police station, for example, where I live, and get a really good outcome where they end up with a domestic violence order. A perpetrator is charged. They're connected to the resourcing system so that they are kept safe. that same person could take that same story to a police station 3 suburbs over and get the wrong police officer that day and be turned away with the comment, come back when it gets physical, or show us the evidence of the physicality. So at the very policing level, the front line, we have that huge concern. We also have governments that, they call it throwing money at the problem. What they don't realise is that there are so many holes in the safety nets here. There are so many hurdles that women face just in the domestic and family violence setting alone that they are very much unlikely to be safe in their lifetime. And the governments are not willing to dismantle those support services and start again to fix the holes and do something more than just throw a few Band-Aids at it. It takes a big will to make change on this. It takes a lot of money. It takes a societal change in attitude. It takes men coming forward. It takes men looking at themselves from the inside. And it takes, it basically takes the media, the judicial system, the police force. Everyone needs to come together and work together. And we are nowhere near that point.
Nowhere near that point. Well, one of the scariest parts of being trapped with a dangerous person is just how invisible it can be to others. Now, the universal sign for help is a discreet hand gesture where a person intentionally folds the 4 fingers over the thumb, and this can give women a discreet way to show that they're in danger. Take a look at this.
She's gonna do it again. I swear I saw her do it.
Wait, that's it?
That's it.
That's a sign?
Yeah, that's it. She's still doing it. Hey, babe, I want to follow them. Okay.
Are you sure?
Chantal, there is a lack of accountability, isn't there? We played in our opening there the Mexican influencer who was shot dead live streaming on TikTok. Mexico has long battled this gender violence. You've documented it. You now have a female president. Has that changed anything?
Not really. Like you just mentioned, right? There's a system, so we can put as many women as we want, but the system is still there. And unfortunately, many times the women are complying with this system, right? Also in Mexico, just as I mentioned earlier, with the strong presence of organized crime, comes security policies that focuses more on militarization, and this has also made gender-based violence worse. Right, the feminist collectives have pointed out that many of the femicides are now being carried. Now happen with a firearm and in public places, right? So the relationship between perpetrator and victim is not always that clear. So yeah, I think even though we have a woman as president, we still need a lot of political will to attend femicides and disappearances, because it's important to remember that many disappearances or many of the women who become victim of disappearances, they probably also are victim of femicide, but we need resources and we need protocols to carry out searches throughout the country. And the families of the disappeared are the ones leading this. So unfortunately, even though we have more women in power, things are not changing on the ground.
Well, we keep talking about femicide, which is a very scientific term, as we heard earlier from Sherele as well. We're talking about, and this is figures from the United Nations, 1 woman or young girl killed every 10 minutes globally. I mean, this is an extraordinary figure and an extraordinary reality. Cameron, you have been studying gender-based violence. And I think we don't want to stigmatize all men. Of course, there are amazing men out there, but this is a trend. Right? This is a trend. This is a reality. Where does it come from? And is it something that can be changed? Because I want to go to you, Sherele, afterwards, because in your pre-interview, you said you didn't think that this could change in your lifetime. It seems to be so ingrained in DNA. How would you describe it, Cameron?
I think that in many spaces with marginalized groups, people in power are not ready to get rid of that power. And I think often what men feel is empowered and more masculine if they can exert that power on someone who's beneath them. And unfortunately, that is women and young girls. And so we almost act as a stepping stool for these men to feel like they are the man. And that machismo masculine culture where we view this abusive, aggressive behavior as manly is a very real problem. And it's even entered different cultures in South Africa. And so people are very attached to their cultures and they become even more defensive when we call out their cultures and we say, you know what? Doing this is not okay. And I really want to echo the sentiments of Sherele and Chantal about the government's role as well, because the way that they depict and review gender-based violence is what then becomes the message for the rest of the country. And, you know, as Women for Change, we did a handover on the 11th of April asking the government to acknowledge gender-based violence as a national disaster. And to this day, we have not seen real change in implementation happen. And so despite the horrific statistics that you've mentioned, you know, and for us, we deal with 117 cases of rape being reported every day, and that only being 5%, our country will not acknowledge how dire the situation is. And I think that's why, you know, Sherele would echo the sentiments of when will we really see change? And it feels so far because it feels like we're still begging people to even acknowledge that this is happening to women.
Despite those numbers, which are shocking, you mentioned there are 117 rapes every day. Sherele, as I mentioned there in your pre-interview, you said you didn't think this was going to change in your lifetime. You also created a mural, I believe, which showed the faces of over 100 women who had been killed in gender-based violence. And then somebody came and spray painted on it, "War on Men." How does that work?
Yeah, that's correct. So that mural it now contains more than 143 women lost to violence in the last 19 months. It's right in the middle of Melbourne, very prominent, viewed by millions of people online and in person. And someone did come down and paint "War on Men." Crazily, almost all of those women were killed by men, 96% of them. There is no war on men. Women talking about male violence, women talking about being safe, women talking about wanting policy change and changes in the system is not an attack on men. It is not a war on men. And the reality is that if we can reduce male violence against women, we reduce male violence against men because they are interlinked. And we know that men are definitely in this country 4 times more likely to be killed by another man than a woman. So it makes sense that reducing male violence, changing attitudes and making the system safer will save more male lives than it will actually save female lives.
Chantal, have you ever felt threatened or scared as a journalist in Mexico, as a female journalist in Mexico, considering also the reality that happens to journalists and everything that you're documenting?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I have felt like that as a female journalist, but also just as a woman, you know. And I think that's always a challenge when I'm working and when I'm on my way home, you know, like how to separate those fears. But I also I think, like I mentioned before about normalization, you learn to live with it. And I know that I'm more vulnerable when I'm reporting in certain areas, right? Because even though we are still missing a lot of data, we civil organization and collectives of the families, they often hold more information than law enforcement. So when I have access to this information, I know how to move in certain places, in certain regions. And I think for me, that has been kind of my way to protect me and protect the the people I work with, but the threat is always there, right? If we see at the data, female journalists, activists, land defenders, business owners, even female politicians in local governments, they have been killed, and many times just because they were challenging the system, right? Or they were too loud, or they were exposing something. So in my case, which I cover mainly disappearances, I always go to these areas with families of the disappeared. And here in Mexico, it's really weird to say this, but many of these collectives, they have established a dialogue with local criminal groups to allow them to search for their missing loved ones in those areas. So every time I do on-the-ground reporting is with these collectives, which in some part are negotiating these truce or this deal with local criminal groups to continue their search efforts. So yeah, the danger is always there, but in some way, I think different, me as a journalist, the families, we have learned, or we have developed these strategies to move around in this environment. But obviously, I mean, that has a toll on our health, or on emotional well-being, on our mental health, and we don't talk about it, right? We just normalize that this is it, and that's it. There's nothing we can do about it.
It does seem to be something that has become somewhat normalized. Sherele, you have firsthand experience of gender-based violence. What advice would you give to someone watching this show who might be in an incredibly difficult and dangerous situation? How can women protect themselves when they are threatened by people so intimately close to them?
Well, I think that we need to remember that women face violence from people within the family and outside of the family. So a woman could, for instance, be stalked by a colleague and be murdered by that person. So we need to recognize that violence against women takes more forms than domestic and family violence, because by not recognizing that, not talking about that, we are not giving guidance to women outside of that area that are also in quite a bit of danger. I mean, for me, the first thing is always try to be in the safest position you can possibly be in. If the police are not responding, if the domestic and family violence services are turning you away, then often you will need to reach out to family and friends and find a safe house. Have a bag packed, have some money set aside if you possibly can. And one of the key things is talking to other people and letting them know. I mean, obviously you are going to call your emergency services first, but we do know that there's often a failure there. So it's really shit to have to say this, but basically we need to be like our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers, have that bag packed, put away a bit of money wherever you can put it, and just take that opportunity to get out and have those conversations with people you trust that can keep you safe.
Cameron, we're running out of time. Give the final word to you. If you could just briefly, you've been working in this field on social media, highlighting it. Are you seeing a change? You said it was a terrifying situation, or do you think it is such a huge mountain still that women as a whole need to tackle for these numbers, these shocking numbers, to go down?
I get very emotional and very upset, and I think my team at Women for Change echoes these sentiments. We walk hand in hand with our survivors and victims' families, and we witness the pain and the suffering they go through. And, speaking to Sherele and how hopeless it feels to be here and trying to support them when they're turned away at every turn. And the scariest thing is there's been a 33.8% increase in femicides over the past year. And so as much as we're doing the work, as much as we're speaking up, it almost feels never ending. It feels like it just progressively gets worse. And though social media is powerful and we are reaching the right kind of people and we were able to have our protests, it is still such a daunting mountain to climb. And I know Women for Change, one thing we will continue to do is stand by our survivors and stand with these victims and their families, because at the end of the day, sometimes that's all they need.
Shocking numbers that continue to rise. Sherele, Cameron and Chantal, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for being part of the conversation, and I'll see you soon.